I'm Sophie, 27, and my entire world shattered with one phone call from my mother. The $900,000 debt she claimed was suddenly my responsibility came with an ultimatum that froze my blood. If you don't pay, I'll die. For years, I'd worked to build financial security only to have it threatened by the one person who should protect me. My response to her manipulation shocked everyone, including myself. Before I dive into this painful story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to make a difficult choice between family loyalty and self-preservation. Growing up with my mother, Linda, was like riding a financial roller coaster that only went down. Our utilities were constantly being shut off, sometimes for weeks at a time. I remember doing homework by candlelight, not as a fun activity, but because our electricity had been disconnected again. Winter showers were ice cold, and summer nights were spent sweating without air conditioning. The apartment manager knew us by name, not in a friendly way, but because eviction notices were taped to our door so frequently. What confused me as a child was seeing my mother's expensive handbags and designer clothes while our kitchen cupboard stood empty. She drove a luxury car that was constantly at risk of being repossessed. When I was 8, I opened the door to find repo men taking our furniture, while my mother screamed at them from our driveway, creating a scene the neighborhood talked about for months. The most humiliating moments came at school. My lunch account was perpetually empty, leaving me to either go hungry or face the pitying looks from cafeteria staff who sometimes slipped me food against policy. During field trips, my permission slips were signed, but the check spaces remained blank, forcing teachers to quietly cover my costs while shooting me sympathetic glances they thought I didn't notice. By 14, I was working after school at a local grocery store, officially stocking shelves, but unofficially supporting our household. I learned to hide money from my mother. Keeping cash in a hollowed-out book I'd read was a good hiding place. The first time I paid our electric bill, the customer service representative asked if I was calling for my mother. I lied and said yes, my voice deliberately lower, knowing what I was doing wasn't exactly allowed, but was absolutely necessary. I made a promise to myself back then, sitting in our dark apartment counting dollar bills by flashlight. I would never ever end up financially vulnerable like my mother. I watched her cycle of splurging and panicking, borrowing from one credit card to pay another, taking loans from friends she'd eventually avoid. It was a masterclass in what not to do with money, and I studied it carefully. College was my escape plan. While other students partied, I juggled classes with 2 part-time jobs. My roommates complained about 8 a.m. classes while I was already returning from my morning shift at the campus coffee shop. Weekends weren't for fun, but for picking up extra hours at the bookstore or taking freelance marketing projects from local businesses. I lived on ramen and free campus event food, squirreling away every possible dollar. My mother offered no support during these years. In fact, she occasionally called asking for money, claiming emergencies that my childhood experience had taught me were likely manufactured. Each time I declined, the calls became less frequent, our relationship cooling to occasional holiday texts and obligatory birthday calls. After graduation, I landed an entry-level position at a marketing firm. My starting salary was modest, but it was stable with health insurance and a retirement plan, concepts that seemed like fantasy growing up. I lived with 3 roommates in a tiny apartment, brought lunch from home every day, and continued my frugal habits despite finally having a steady paycheck. Promotion came after 2 years of working later than everyone else, taking on projects nobody wanted, and building a portfolio of successful campaigns. My new title came with a substantial raise, enough to move into my own apartment, a studio, but all mine. No roommates, no mother, just my own quiet space where bills were paid on time every time. By my 27th birthday, I had an emergency fund, a growing 401k, and was eyeing a possible condo purchase in the next few years. My coworkers sometimes teased me about my careful spending habits, but the security I felt checking my bank account was worth more than impromptu shopping sprees or lavish vacations. I had built what I never had as a child: financial stability, through my own disciplined choices. That Sunday morning before the call seemed so normal. I was enjoying my weekend ritual of coffee on my small balcony, reading financial news on my tablet, and planning my week ahead. The spring air was perfect. Not too warm, not too cool. Birds were singing in the tree across the street. Everything felt right in my carefully constructed world. I had no idea that my phone sitting innocently on the table beside me was about to deliver news that would threaten everything I'd built. The call came at 10:17 a.m. I remember checking the time thinking it was unusually early for my mother to call. Typically, she only reached out on birthdays or when she needed something. Seeing her name flash across my screen immediately triggered a familiar knot in my stomach. The Pavlovian response of a child who learned that mother calling usually meant trouble. "Sophie, sweetheart." She began, her voice holding that strange tone I recognized from childhood, a mixture of panic and calculation, like someone simultaneously experiencing an emergency while plotting their next move. "I hope you're sitting down. I need to talk to you about something important." I took a sip of my now cooling coffee, bracing myself for whatever crisis she was about to present. A broken-down car. Rent money, medical bills for some minor procedure. These were her usual requests, typically in the hundreds or maybe low thousands of dollars, amounts I could and did refuse without too much guilt. "I'm in a bit of financial trouble," she continued, mastering the art of understatement. "It's gotten rather serious, and I need your help." "What kind of trouble?" I asked, my free hand already gripping the edge of my balcony chair. What followed was a financial horror story that unfolded like a car crash in slow motion. First came the medical bills. Apparently she'd had cosmetic procedures without insurance coverage. "Just some necessary work, nothing frivolous," she insisted, though the $30,000 figure she mentioned suggested otherwise. Then came the credit card debt. 6 cards maxed out, totaling nearly $150,000. "The interest rates are criminal," she complained, as though she were the victim rather than the spender. The mortgage on her house had been refinanced 3 times, pulling out equity for what she called investments, but couldn't actually detail when I pressed. That added another $200,000 to the growing tally. Personal loans from banks, online lenders, and even several friends brought the number higher still. As she continued her financial confessional, the total kept climbing: 500,000, 700,000, until finally she admitted the full sum, just over $900,000 all told. I nearly dropped my phone. The amount was staggering, more than I would earn in several years, even with my recent promotion. It was house money, retirement money. It was an amount that could destroy not just one financial life, but multiple generations. "Mom," I managed to say, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears, "how did this happen? How did you even qualify for this much credit?" There was a pause, a beat too long. "That's not important right now," she said dismissively. "What matters is figuring out how to fix this, which is why I'm calling you." The next words froze my blood. "This is your responsibility too, Sophie." "My responsibility?" I echoed, confusion temporarily replacing shock. "How is your debt my responsibility?" "Family takes care of family," she said, her voice hardening. "I raised you, sacrificed everything for you. All those years of putting food on the table, clothes on your back, a roof over your head. Did you think that came for free?" My hand was shaking now. "You're my mother. That's what parents do. They don't send their children a bill later." "Don't be so literal," she snapped. "I'm not sending you a bill. I'm asking for help in my time of need. I was there for you your entire childhood. Now I need you to be there for me." The manipulation was so familiar, it had its own taste, bitter and metallic like blood from biting my tongue too many times over the years. "Besides," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, "if I don't get help with this debt, I don't think I can go on. The stress is killing me. Sometimes I think about just ending it all." My heart raced, panic rising. Despite our complicated history, the thought of my mother harming herself was unbearable. "The debt collectors call day and night," she continued, capitalizing on my silence. "I can't sleep, can't eat. My blood pressure is through the roof. The doctor says I'm at risk for a stroke or heart attack from the stress. If you don't help me, Sophie, I might die. And that would be on you." the ultimate emotional weapon deployed with precision. The implied message was clear: pay the debt or be responsible for your mother's death. I need an answer by the end of the week, she said firmly. I have appointments with some of the creditors, and I need to know what to tell them. Before I could formulate any response, she added, I love you, Sophie. I know you'll do the right thing, and hung up. I sat frozen on my balcony phone, still pressed to my ear, listening to the silence where my mother's voice had been. The birds were still singing, the sun still shining, but my world had tilted on its axis. The financial security I'd spent my entire adult life building suddenly felt like a sandcastle with the tide coming in, destined for destruction no matter how carefully it had been built. Monday morning found me calling in sick to work for the first time since I'd started at the company. My boss sounded concerned. I was never sick, never missed deadlines, but I couldn't focus on reassuring her. My mind was consumed by the impossible situation my mother had dropped into my lap. After a sleepless night calculating and recalculating my finances, I knew with absolute certainty that I couldn't pay off my mother's debt. Even if I liquidated every asset I had, cashed out my 401k, with penalties, sold my car, and took the maximum personal loans my credit would allow, I'd still fall catastrophically short. And I would destroy my own financial future in the process. But her threat of self-harm kept replaying in my mind. What if she really was suicidal? Could I live with myself if something happened to her because I refused to help? I needed more information before I could decide anything. My first call was to Diane, my mother's neighbor and sometimes friend. They'd known each other for years, though their relationship seemed to wax and wane depending on whether my mother needed something from her. Diane, it's Sophie, Linda's daughter. Sophie, how nice to hear from you. It's been 2 years since you visited. The subtle guilt trip wasn't lost on me, but I pushed past it. I'm worried about my mom. We had a conversation yesterday that concerned me. She mentioned feeling very stressed, maybe even having thoughts of harming herself. Is she doing okay? There was a pause on the line. That's odd, Diane said finally. I just saw Linda an hour ago. She was headed to the Westfield Mall with some shopping bags already in hand. She seemed perfectly fine to me, excited about some sale at Nordstrom. Shopping. Of course. Even with crushing debt and supposedly suicidal thoughts, my mother's solution was retail therapy. Thanks, Diane. That's reassuring. I said, though what I felt was a mixture of relief and anger. After hanging up, I made a decision. I needed to see the situation for myself. My mother lived 2 hours away. Close enough for a day trip, far enough that visits were infrequent and required planning. Today there would be no advance notice. I arrived at my mother's house just after noon. Her car wasn't in the driveway, confirming Diane's report that she was out shopping. I still had a key from my last visit when she'd asked me to water her plants during a weekend trip. The house that greeted me was nothing like what I expected from someone drowning in debt and contemplating suicide. The living room featured a new sectional sofa that I'd never seen before in a buttery leather that probably cost more than my monthly rent. A large smart TV dominated one wall, while new artwork decorated the others. The kitchen had been remodeled with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that still had the manufacturer's protective film on some pieces. This wasn't the home of someone in financial distress. This was the home of someone living well beyond their means. I found her home office in the spare bedroom, the one place that showed signs of the crisis she'd described. Papers were strewn across the desk, many bearing the red, past due stamps that I remembered from my childhood. I began sorting through them, feeling slightly guilty about the invasion of privacy, but justifying it with the enormity of what she was asking of me. The stack of medical bills confirmed what I'd suspected. The procedures weren't necessary health interventions, but elective cosmetic surgeries. Liposuction, Botox fillers, even a facelift. All performed at a luxury medical spa with convenient financing options that seemed to have added 20% to the original costs. Credit card statements revealed purchases at high-end department stores, online boutiques, and jewelry shops. One card had been used exclusively for a vacation to Bali, complete with a private villa and personal chef. Another seemed dedicated to restaurants with multiple charges of $200 or more several times weekly. The mortgage refinancing documents were particularly disturbing. She'd pulled equity out of the house 3 times in 5 years, each time receiving sizable cash payouts. The most recent refinance had an interest rate that made me wince, the kind of predatory lending that targets desperate borrowers with nowhere else to turn. Then I found something that stopped my heart. A credit card statement in my name for an account I had never opened. The billing address was my mother's house, but the name on the account was clearly mine. The balance was over $30,000. With shaking hands, I continued searching and found 5 more accounts in my name. Credit cards, personal loans, even a car loan for a vehicle I'd never seen. All told, nearly $200,000 of the debt my mother claimed was our family responsibility was actually fraudulently created in my name. She had stolen my identity. The realization hit me physically like a punch to the stomach. I ran to the bathroom and threw up my body, rejecting the betrayal before my mind could fully process it. When I returned to the office, I found one more piece of the puzzle, a shoebox filled with letters from collection agencies dating back years. This wasn't a recent crisis. This was a long-term pattern of financial abuse that had finally reached a breaking point. Among the papers was a photograph of my mother with a man I didn't recognize looking cozy at what appeared to be an expensive restaurant. On the back was written, "With Gregory at Le Bernardin, February." There were other photos of them together, on a beach at what looked like a casino, shopping bags in hand outside designer stores. A boyfriend I'd never heard about apparently encouraging her spending sprees. As I sat surrounded by evidence of my mother's deception, the sound of a key in the front door jolted me back to the present moment. She was home, and I was sitting in a pile of proof that she had not only been financially irresponsible, but had committed fraud against her own daughter. My mother's footsteps echoed through the house, accompanied by the rustling of shopping bags. The familiar sound transported me back to childhood, when that noise usually meant we wouldn't be paying the electric bill that month. I remained frozen in her office, surrounded by the evidence of her betrayal, uncertain whether to confront her immediately or try to leave with the documents. "Hello?" she called out, having noticed my car in the driveway. "Is someone here?" Her voice held more annoyance than fear, not the reaction of someone worried about intruders. I stepped into the hallway, financial statements clutched in my hand. "It's me, Mom." Her surprise seemed genuine, quickly masked by a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sophie, what a wonderful surprise. Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" She dropped her shopping bags by the door and moved as if to hug me, but stopped when she saw my expression. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "What's wrong?" I repeated, my voice unnaturally calm. I held up the credit card statement bearing my name. "Maybe you can explain why there's a Visa card with a $30,000 balance in my name that I never applied for." Her face underwent a remarkable transformation. The warm maternal mask dropped, replaced briefly by panic, then calculation, and finally settling on defensive indignation. "You were snooping through my private papers," she demanded, attempting to flip the script and make me the wrongdoer. "Answer the question, Mom. Did you open credit accounts in my name without my knowledge or permission?" She sighed dramatically and moved into the living room, settling onto her expensive new couch, like we were about to have a casual chat about the weather. "Sit down, Sophie. You're overreacting." I remained standing. "I'm overreacting to identity theft, to fraud, to finding out my own mother has been using my credit to fund her lifestyle." "It's not like that," she insisted, her tone becoming wheedling. "I was always going to pay those bills. I just needed a little help temporarily, and your credit score was so good. It seemed a shame not to use it." Not to use it. The absurdity of her statement momentarily left me speechless. "It's not a resource for you to tap into. It's my financial identity, my future, and you had no right to it." "Oh, please," she scoffed, her demeanor hardening. "After everything I've done for you, the sacrifices I made, the years I spent raising you alone after your father abandoned us, you owe me." There it was, the core belief behind it all. In her mind, I was forever indebted to her simply for being born, for being raised. The basic responsibilities of parenthood were coins she had deposited in a bank of obligation, expecting to withdraw with interest when it suited her. Raising me wasn't a sacrifice, Mom. It was your job as a parent. I didn't ask to be born. She stood up suddenly, face flushed with anger. You ungrateful little bitch. I gave you everything. Everything except financial security, emotional stability, or basic honesty. I countered, surprising myself with my steadiness. I had to build those things on my own, despite you, not because of you. The doorbell rang, interrupting our confrontation. My mother's expression shifted from anger to something almost like relief. When she opened the door, the man from the photograph stepped in. Gregory, presumably. He was older than my mother by at least a decade, expensively dressed with the overconfident demeanor of someone used to getting his way. Linda, darling, you left your phone in my car, he began, then noticed me. Oh, I didn't realize you had company. This is my daughter, Sophie. My mother said, her voice suddenly syrupy sweet. Sophie, this is Gregory, my boyfriend. He extended his hand, which I ignored. Your boyfriend who accompanies you on luxury vacations and shopping sprees while you're $500,000 in debt. His smile faltered. Linda, what is she talking about? My mother jumped in quickly. Nothing important. Sophie's just upset because I asked for a little financial help. She's always been selfish about money. The audacity of her lie ignited something in me. I found all the statements, Mom. All the accounts in my name. The collection letters. Everything. You've committed fraud, and you've dragged this man into it too. I turned to Gregory. Did you know she's almost $1 million in debt? That she's opening fraudulent accounts? That she's facing potential criminal charges? Gregory's face paled. He looked at my mother, who was now glaring at me with naked hatred. Is this true, Linda? Of course not, she snapped, but the confidence in her voice wavered. Sophie is exaggerating. She's always been dramatic. I pulled out my phone and began taking photos of the statements I was still holding. I'm not the one being dramatic. I'm documenting evidence of identity theft and fraud. My mother lunged forward, attempting to snatch the papers from my hand. Give me those. They're my private property. Actually, I said, stepping back, the statements with my name on them legally belong to me, and I'll be taking them to the police. At the word police, Gregory took a step away from my mother. Linda, what have you done? She ignored him, focusing her fury on me. You wouldn't dare report your own mother to the police. Think about what people would say, the family reputation. What would your cousins think? Your Aunt Margaret? I think they'd wonder why I didn't do it sooner, I replied, though in truth, I hadn't considered the extended family's reaction at all. And frankly, I don't care what people say. I care about protecting myself from financial ruin. My mother switched tactics with the speed of a seasoned manipulator. Her face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. Please, Sophie. I'm your mother. I need you. If you do this, you'll destroy me. I'll lose everything. You've already lost me, I said quietly. You lost me the moment you decided to steal my identity instead of asking for help, or better yet, living within your means. Her tears vanished as quickly as they had appeared, replaced by cold fury. If that's your attitude, then get out of my house. You're no daughter of mine. Consider yourself disowned. Gregory, apparently deciding this family drama was beyond his pay grade, muttered something about talking later, and quickly retreated out the front door. I gathered as many of the relevant financial documents as I could carry, knowing they would be important for what would come next. Goodbye, Mom. I'll have my lawyer contact you. Her parting words followed me to the car. You'll regret this. Sophie blood is supposed to be thicker than water. I got into my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely insert the key into the ignition. Tears blurred my vision as I pulled out of the driveway of the house bought with stolen money and fraudulent credit. I had to pull over after just a few blocks, overcome with sobs that seemed to come from some deep primal place inside me. It wasn't just the financial betrayal, though, that was devastating. It was the confirmation of something I had suspected but denied for years. My mother saw me not as a daughter to love, but as a resource to exploit. In her eyes, I existed to serve her needs, to pay her debts, to clean up her messes. And when I refused that role, I was worthless to her. Somewhere on that long drive home, my sadness hardened into something else. The tears dried. My breathing steadied. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, grief had transformed into determination. I would not let her destroy what I had worked so hard to build. I would not be another victim of her financial abuse. This ended now. The next morning, I called in sick for the second consecutive day, something I'd never done before. My boss's concern was palpable over the phone, but I assured her I'd be back the following day. I needed this time to take action while my resolve was strong. My first call was to a financial advisor whose business card I'd kept from a workshop my company had sponsored months earlier. I explained my situation as clinically as possible, detailing the accounts I'd discovered in my name and the total amounts involved. His sharp intake of breath told me what I already knew. This was bad. "I'm going to be direct with you, Sophie," he said after I finished. "This isn't just a family disagreement about money. What your mother has done is criminal identity theft and fraud. You have two paths forward. You can either accept these debts as your own and try to work out payment plans, or you can report the fraud, which will involve filing police reports against your mother." The choice was presented so starkly, yet it felt like no choice at all. Accepting the fraudulent debts would mean financial ruin, working for years or decades to pay off luxury purchases I'd never made and never benefited from. It would mean my mother facing no consequences, free to potentially do the same thing again when these debts were cleared. "I need to report the fraud," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "What's my first step?" He referred me to a colleague who specialized in identity theft cases, and by noon I was sitting in a small office across from Janet Kim, a sharp-eyed attorney with a no-nonsense demeanor that I found immediately reassuring. "Family identity theft cases are among the most difficult," she told me, reviewing the documents I'd brought. "Emotionally, legally, and practically. Many victims hesitate to press charges against family members, which can complicate the process of disputing the debts." "I'm not hesitating," I assured her, surprising myself with my certainty. "I just need to know what to do." Under Janet's guidance, I spent the afternoon making calls to credit bureaus, placing freezes on my credit to prevent any new accounts from being opened. We submitted formal disputes for each fraudulent account. I'd identified a process that required endless repetition of my story to increasingly skeptical customer service representatives. "But ma'am, the account has been open for 3 years with regular payments until recently," one credit card representative argued. "Why are you only disputing it now?" "Because I only discovered its existence yesterday," I explained for what felt like the 20th time. "I did not open this account. I did not authorize it. I never received statements because they were sent to my mother's address, not mine." Janet took over some of the more difficult calls, her professional authority often accomplishing in minutes what I had failed to achieve in half-hour conversations. By the end of the day, we had documented disputes for all the accounts I knew about and had appointments with 3 different bank fraud departments for later in the week. The most difficult step came last. Janet drove me to the local police station, where I filed a formal report of identity theft against my mother. The officer taking my statement maintained a neutral expression, but I could read the questions in his eyes. How could a daughter do this to her own mother? What kind of family turns on each other this way? What he couldn't understand, what no one who hadn't lived it could truly grasp, was that my mother had turned on me first years ago. This report wasn't the beginning of a betrayal, but the end of one that had been ongoing for decades. Walking out of the police station, I felt both lighter and heavier. A burden had been lifted by taking action, but a new weight had settled in its place, the knowledge that there was no going back. I had crossed a line that would permanently alter my relationship with my mother and potentially with my extended family as well. Over the next few days, I discovered that the situation was even worse than I'd initially thought. As Janet and I dug deeper into my mother's financial maneuvers, we found evidence that I wasn't her only victim. My cousin Thomas had apparently had a car loan taken out in his name, and my Aunt Patricia had her identity used for a home equity line of credit. Neither had discovered the fraud yet, and making those calls to warn them was excruciating. Sophie, Thomas sounded surprised to hear from me. We hadn't spoken in over a year. What's up? Thomas, I need you to check your credit report, I said without preamble. I have reason to believe Aunt Linda may have opened accounts in your name. His confusion quickly gave way to alarm as I explained what I'd discovered. By the end of our conversation, he had pulled his credit report and found the car loan, $45,000 for a luxury vehicle he'd never seen, much less driven. I can't believe she would do this, he said, voice shaking with anger. Actually, no, that's not true. I can absolutely believe it. Aunt Linda's been borrowing money from family members for as long as I can remember. I just never thought she'd go this far. Thomas became an unexpected ally, connecting me with other family members who had similar stories of financial manipulation, if not outright fraud. Some had lent my mother money they never saw again. Others had co-signed loans that they ended up paying entirely themselves. A pattern emerged of calculated exploitation stretching back decades. Most importantly, Thomas put me in touch with my cousin Rachel, who had experienced a similar situation with her father, my mother's brother, several years earlier. Rachel became my lifeline during this period, the only person who truly understood the unique pain of being financially victimized by a parent. The hardest part isn't the money, Rachel told me during one of our long phone conversations. It's accepting that they never saw us as children to protect, but as resources to use. That realization changes everything you thought you knew about your childhood. She was right. As I worked through the practical steps of reclaiming my financial identity, I was simultaneously processing the emotional reality of my relationship with my mother. Memories from my childhood took on new, darker meanings. The times she'd praised my responsibility with money weren't expressions of pride, but assessments of a future resource. Her occasional interest in my career progress wasn't maternal pride, but calculations of my earning potential. Friends tried to be supportive, but most couldn't truly comprehend what I was going through. Just pay off what you can and move on, suggested one well-meaning friend. Family is everything in the end. But that was precisely the problem. In my mother's worldview, family wasn't about love or mutual support. It was a one-way extraction of resources flowing always toward her. Breaking that pattern meant breaking the definition of family I'd been raised with and building something healthier in its place. My therapist, whom I started seeing weekly after filing the police report, helped me navigate this reconstruction of my understanding of family. You're mourning the mother you deserved but never had, she explained during one particularly tearful session. That grief is real and valid, but you're also protecting the life you've built for yourself, and there's strength in that choice. Strength didn't always feel like the right word. Some days I felt only exhaustion from the constant battles with financial institutions, the late-night anxiety about the legal process ahead, the unexpected triggers that could reduce me to tears in the middle of a grocery store. But beneath the fatigue and grief, something solid was forming, a determination that would ultimately see me through. 3 weeks after my confrontation with my mother, the first serious consequences of my police report materialized. She was arrested on multiple counts of identity theft and fraud, not just against me but against Thomas and 2 other family members who had come forward after learning of my situation. The news came via a terse call from a detective handling the case. Ms. Harper, I wanted to inform you that we've taken your mother, Linda Harper, into custody this morning. She'll be arraigned tomorrow at the county courthouse if you wish to attend. I thanked him, mechanically, hung up, and then sat motionless on my couch for nearly an hour, trying to process the reality that my mother was in jail because of my actions. Necessary actions, just actions, but still my actions. The news of the arrest spread through the family like wildfire, igniting a blaze of conflicting reactions. The family group Me Chat that had previously been used mainly for holiday coordination and sharing baby photos suddenly became a battleground. Aunt Margaret, my mother's older sister, led the charge against me. I can't believe you would put your own mother in jail over money. After everything she sacrificed for you, this family has always handled its problems privately. Cousin Jessica chimed in. Some debts can't be measured in dollars. You owe your mother your life, Sophie. This is shameful. Others defended me, creating factions that largely aligned with who had personally experienced my mother's financial manipulation and who had only observed it from a safe distance. Thomas was particularly vocal. Linda committed actual crimes, multiple felonies, against her own family members. Sophie didn't put her in jail, her own actions did. The private messages were worse. Aunt Margaret sent a paragraph-long text describing me as heartless, ungrateful, and responsible for destroying the family. An uncle I rarely spoke with left a voicemail suggesting I drop the charges if I ever wanted to be welcome at family gatherings again. Someone, I never discovered who, found my professional LinkedIn profile and left comments suggesting I was under investigation for financial improprieties, causing a brief but intense panic until the platform removed them. Social media became a minefield. My mother's Facebook friends, many of whom I'd never met, left comments on my old posts calling me a terrible daughter. Several created public posts about young people today having no family loyalty that didn't name me directly but were clearly about my situation. The sustained attack took a toll. I developed insomnia, lying awake replaying conversations and imagining worse ones to come. Anxiety followed me throughout the day, making ordinary tasks like checking email or answering the phone exercises in dread. I lost weight as my appetite disappeared, and dark circles under my eyes became my new normal. The financial impact was substantial as well. Legal fees mounted quickly, even with Janet working at a reduced rate out of sympathy for my situation. I had to take additional days off work for meetings with bank fraud departments, court appearances, and consultations with the district attorney's office, using up my limited paid time off and eventually taking unpaid leave. My credit score, once an impressive 810, plummeted as the fraud investigations progressed. Even though I wasn't responsible for the debts, the disputed accounts appeared as delinquent while the investigations were pending. This temporarily derailed my plans to buy a condo, as no lender would approve me with so many unresolved credit issues. The first court appearance was perhaps the most difficult day. I arrived at the courthouse to find several family members already there, some to support me, others clearly aligned with my mother. The physical division in the courtroom mirrored the emotional schism in our family, with supportive relatives sitting directly behind me, while others clustered near where my mother would be seated. When she was brought in, the sight shocked me. In just 3 weeks, she seemed to have aged years. Her normally carefully maintained appearance had given way to institutional plainness. No makeup, hair unstyled, wearing clothes that I suspected had been provided by a relative since they weren't her usual designer brands. Our eyes met briefly across the room, and the naked hatred in her gaze made me flinch. The legal proceedings themselves were brief and procedural. Charges were read, a not guilty plea entered, bail discussed. My mother's attorney argued passionately that she was a respectable member of the community with no flight risk, deserving of reasonable bail. The prosecutor countered with evidence of the extensive fraud and suggested she was indeed a flight risk given the potential penalties she faced. Throughout the proceedings, my mother maintained a performance of dignified suffering, occasionally dabbing at non-existent tears with a tissue provided by Aunt Margaret. When given an opportunity to address the court regarding bail, she launched into a speech about being a devoted single mother who had sacrificed everything for her ungrateful daughter, me, who was now persecuting her out of spite. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, cut her off mid-sentence. "Mrs. Harper, these proceedings are about the charges against you, not your relationship with your daughter. Please restrict your comments to matters relevant to bail." It was a small moment of validation that nearly broke my carefully maintained composure. Someone in authority had seen through my mother's manipulation, had refused to be swayed by her performance of victimhood. It shouldn't have meant so much, but it did. Bail was set at an amount my mother clearly hadn't anticipated. Her face registered shock as the figure was announced, and a hurried conference with her attorney followed. I later learned that Gregory, the boyfriend, had abandoned her shortly after our confrontation, taking with him the financial support she had apparently been counting on for her legal troubles. As the weeks progressed, more details emerged about the extent of my mother's financial schemes. The district attorney's office discovered evidence of identity theft against at least 7 different individuals' fraud, involving over 15 financial institutions and a pattern of behavior dating back nearly a decade. What had begun as an unfortunate family matter had expanded into a significant criminal case. Through it all, my mother maintained her innocence both legally and in the court of family opinion. She gave tear-filled interviews to local news outlets, portraying herself as a loving mother, being persecuted by an ungrateful daughter. She claimed I had authorized her to use my identity in case of emergencies, and was now vindictively withdrawing that permission. The most difficult revelation came when investigators uncovered evidence that my mother had begun using my identity when I was still in high school, opening a store credit card in my name when I was just 17 and legally a minor. The betrayal wasn't new. It had been ongoing for nearly my entire adult life. Perhaps the most shocking development came 3 months into the legal proceedings. My mother's attorney approached Janet about a possible plea deal. In exchange for my agreement not to testify, my mother would plead guilty to reduced charges that would likely result in probation rather than jail time. The offer came with a handwritten letter from my mother. Unlike her previous communications, which had alternated between hostile accusations and manipulative pleas, this letter was cold and businesslike. She acknowledged no wrongdoing but offered to put this unfortunate misunderstanding behind us if I would help her avoid incarceration. The final line revealed her unchanged perspective. "After all, you still owe me for raising you." I declined the offer. When the case finally went to court, I was called to testify about the accounts I had discovered and the confrontation at my mother's house. Walking to the witness stand, passing directly in front of where my mother sat with her attorney, I kept my eyes forward, refusing to be intimidated by her presence. During my testimony, I spoke clearly and factually, detailing the discovery of the fraudulent accounts and the subsequent investigation. When asked about the impact of these actions, I allowed myself one moment of emotional honesty. "The financial damage is substantial and ongoing," I said, "but the knowledge that my own mother viewed me not as someone to protect, but as an identity to exploit, has been the greater injury. It has fundamentally changed how I understand my childhood and my family." My mother's attorney attempted to paint me as financially controlling, suggesting I had withdrawn permission for accounts I had previously approved. The evidence contradicted these claims so thoroughly that even family members who had come to support my mother looked uncomfortable as the questioning proceeded. When it was my mother's turn to testify, she stuck to her story of having implicit permission to use my identity, but under the prosecutor's questioning, her narrative began to unravel. She couldn't explain why, if I had given permission, the accounts were sent to her address rather than mine. She had no answer for why she had opened accounts in the names of other family members who clearly hadn't authorized them. The pivotal moment came when she was asked directly about the timing of the first account she had opened in my name. "And this credit card application submitted in Sophie's name, what was the date on this document?" the prosecutor asked, showing her the evidence. "April 15th, she replied reluctantly. "Of what year, Mrs. Harper?" A pause. "2014. "And how old was your daughter in April 2014? Another longer pause. 17. "So she was a minor legally incapable of entering into a credit agreement. Is that correct?" My mother's facade finally cracked. "She was nearly 18, she snapped, "and she was more responsible than most adults I knew. The credit card companies didn't care how old she was, as long as the bills got paid, which they did until recently." The admission of knowing I was underage, coupled with the implication that she had been making payments until recently, effectively ended any pretense of innocence. The jury's verdict came quickly guilty on multiple counts of identity theft, fraud, and financial exploitation. At the sentencing hearing, I was invited to make a victim impact statement. I had prepared for this moment, writing and rewriting my statement with help from my therapist to ensure it expressed my truth without being driven by anger or vindictiveness. Standing before the court, I looked directly at my mother for the first time since the ordeal began. "The crimes committed against me and my family members weren't just financial in nature," I began. "They were a profound breach of the most fundamental trust, the trust between a parent and child. My mother taught me about financial responsibility not through positive example, but by showing me exactly what happens when that responsibility is abandoned. She showed me that family bonds can be weaponized and exploited. These were painful lessons, but I've learned them well. I paused, gathering strength for what came next. I don't stand here seeking revenge or punishment. I stand here seeking protection. For myself, for my family members, and yes, even for my mother. The cycle of financial destruction she has created hurts everyone it touches, including herself. My hope is that the consequences she faces today will finally interrupt that cycle and create space for healing, though I recognize that healing may never include reconciliation between us. The courtroom was silent when I finished. My mother, who had maintained her composed, victimized expression throughout the proceedings, finally showed a genuine emotion surprise. She had expected hatred, had prepared for it, had likely already formulated how she would use it to further her narrative of being persecuted. My measured response had caught her off guard. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in prison, followed by 5 years of probation, and ordered restitution to all victims. It was less than the maximum possible sentence, but more than the suspended sentence her attorney had requested. As she was led away, my mother looked back at me one final time. I couldn't read her expression, perhaps because for once it wasn't calculated for effect, but reflected her actual complicated feelings. I walked out of the courthouse flanked by Thomas, Rachel, and friends who had supported me throughout the ordeal. The reporters who had followed the case called out questions, but I declined to comment, wanting this chapter closed as quietly as possible. That night alone in my apartment, I cried for what felt like hours, not from sadness or regret, but from release. The worst had happened. My mother was in prison because of my testimony. Family members had turned against me. My financial situation was complicated by legal fees and credit damage. And yet somehow I was still standing. I had survived what once would have seemed unsurvivable, and that knowledge carried its own kind of strength. 6 months after my mother began serving her sentence, I was finally starting to rebuild. The fraudulent accounts had been removed from my credit report, though the process had been excruciatingly slow and required constant follow-up. My credit score was gradually recovering now, back in the respectable 740s and climbing. I had managed to negotiate payment plans for the legal fees, and my emergency fund was slowly being replenished. The emotional rebuilding was happening at its own pace. I continued seeing my therapist, though we had reduced sessions to twice monthly rather than weekly. The most significant breakthrough had come when I finally accepted that my relationship with my mother had always been transactional rather than loving, not because of any failure on my part, but because of her own limitations. This realization, while painful, freed me from the cycle of trying to earn love that wasn't available. Setting boundaries with family became my new priority. I had limited contact with relatives who had been unsupportive or outright hostile, which initially felt like another loss, but ultimately gave me space to strengthen relationships with those who had stood by me. Thomas and I now had regular video calls, our shared experience having forged a closer bond than we'd had previously. Rachel and I met monthly for dinner, forming a friendship independent of our family connection. I found unexpected freedom in these new boundaries. Without the constant anxiety of waiting for my mother's next crisis or demand, I could focus on building the life I wanted. I joined a community garden, something I'd always been interested in, but never made time for. I took a cooking class and discovered a talent for creating elaborate desserts. Small pleasures that had been crowded out by family drama now had room to flourish. Friends became increasingly important, forming a chosen family that operated on mutual respect rather than obligation. My closest friend Alicia had been unfailingly supportive throughout the legal proceedings, sometimes just sitting with me in silence when words couldn't help. Now we were planning a weekend trip to the coast, my first actual vacation in years. Work provided another source of stability. My boss had been surprisingly understanding about my situation, allowing me flexibility during the worst of the legal battle and expressing genuine concern for my well-being. When things settled, I threw myself back into projects with renewed focus, eventually earning a promotion that came with a welcome salary increase. The most unexpected development in my healing process was joining a support group for victims of familial financial abuse. I discovered it through my therapist, a small gathering of people who had experienced similar betrayals by parents, siblings, or spouses. Hearing their stories helped normalize my experience and reduce the shame I still sometimes felt for having pressed charges against my own mother. In that safe space, I began sharing my story more openly, first with the group and then through an anonymous blog. Writing about my experience became therapeutic, helping me process emotions I hadn't fully acknowledged. To my surprise, the blog gained followers, other victims searching for guidance, validation, or simply the knowledge that they weren't alone. Messages arrived from readers facing similar situations, asking for advice on recognizing financial manipulation and setting boundaries with family. Though I was careful never to offer legal counsel, I could share what I'd learned about protecting credit, documenting fraud, and finding appropriate professional help. Each person I helped strengthened my conviction that going public with my story had been the right choice. 3 months into my mother's sentence, I received a letter from her. Unlike her previous communications, this one came through her attorney, who added a note saying my mother had been informed not to contact me directly given the ongoing restraining order. The letter itself was predictably manipulative. She expressed no remorse for her actions, instead focusing on how difficult prison was and how I had put her there. She described in detail the indignities of incarceration, clearly hoping to trigger my guilt. The closing paragraph reverted to her consistent theme. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me. I hope you're satisfied with what you've done to your mother." In the past, such a letter would have devastated me, leaving me questioning my decisions and drowning in guilt. Now I could recognize it for what it was, another attempt at manipulation from someone incapable of taking responsibility for her actions. I filed the letter away and didn't respond. My financial identity continued to strengthen along with my emotional health. I worked with a financial planner to create a robust system of protection against future fraud, including regular credit monitoring and security freezes that would remain in place indefinitely. When a notification arrived that someone had attempted to open a store credit card in my name while my mother was incarcerated, the system worked. The application was automatically declined, and I was immediately alerted. The investigation revealed that the application had come from my mother's boyfriend, Gregory, apparently using information she had provided before her arrest. This incident led to additional charges against both of them and reinforced the importance of the protections I had put in place. Dating was the area of my life that recovered most slowly. Trust didn't come easily after such profound betrayal, and early attempts at relationships faltered when I struggled to be vulnerable. How do you explain to someone that your trust issues stem from your mother stealing your identity? That normal family dynamics feel alien to you? That you've had to redefine what love means from the ground up? Eventually, I met Daniel through a friend's dinner party. He was patient with my cautious approach to dating and didn't press when I was vague about my family situation. When I finally felt secure enough to share my story, his response was exactly what I needed. Not pity or horror, but simple acknowledgement of my experience and respect for how I had handled it. Our relationship developed slowly with clear communication about expectations and boundaries. When discussions about moving in together began, I was straightforward about my financial boundaries. Separate accounts, clear agreement about shared expenses, regular financial check-ins. Rather than seeing these requirements as signs of distrust, Daniel recognized them as the healthy protections they were. Healing didn't mean forgetting or even necessarily forgiving what had happened. It meant integrating the experience into my life story without letting it define me. It meant recognizing the strength I had found in standing up for myself, even when doing so was excruciating. It meant building a life defined by choice rather than obligation or fear. 6 months into this rebuilding process, I received another letter, not from my mother this time, but from Aunt Margaret, who had been among my harshest critics. The tone was different from her previous communications, less accusatory and more reflective. "I owe you an apology," she wrote. "After visiting Linda in prison and speaking with other family members, I've come to understand that what happened to you happened to others as well. including people I trusted. I was wrong to blame you for protecting yourself, and I'm sorry for adding to your pain during an already difficult time. The letter continued explaining that she had discovered Linda had also opened an account in her husband's name without authorization. The family narrative was shifting as more victims came forward, and the image of my mother as misunderstood victim was giving way to recognition of her as a skilled manipulator who had hurt many people. Margaret's apology didn't immediately heal our relationship, but it opened a door to potential reconciliation with parts of my family I had assumed were lost to me. We began with cautious email exchanges, eventually progressing to a lunch where we spoke honestly about the family dynamics that had allowed my mother's behavior to continue unchecked for so long. Similar reconnections happened with other relatives who had initially taken my mother's side but later recognized the pattern of abuse. These renewed relationships were different, more honest, less based on obligation, and with clearer boundaries. We were building a new kind of family, one based on mutual respect rather than blind loyalty. The most profound lesson I learned through this painful journey was that love shouldn't come with a price tag. Real love doesn't keep a ledger of debts and payments. It doesn't use obligation as a weapon or relationship as leverage. Love in its healthiest form wants the beloved to thrive, even when that thriving requires difficult boundaries. I still receive occasional updates about my mother through the Victim Services Coordinator at the District Attorney's Office. She continues to maintain her innocence to fellow inmates and participates minimally in the financial literacy programs offered by the prison. Her release date approaches, and I've worked with my legal team to ensure the restraining order remains in place and all my financial protections are secure. People sometimes ask if I regret my decision to press charges, if the family rupture and legal battles were worth it. My answer is always the same. I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret doing what was necessary. The alternative would have been surrendering my financial future and accepting a lifetime of manipulation and exploitation. That price was too high even for family peace. The debt my mother claimed I owed her, for raising me for being her daughter, was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of parenthood and love. Children aren't investments with expected returns. They're individuals who deserve protection and support as they grow into their own lives. The most expensive debt I ever paid wasn't financial, but emotional, the cost of breaking free from toxic family patterns and establishing my worth beyond what I could provide to others. It was a painful payment, but the freedom it purchased was priceless. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between family loyalty and self-protection? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story helped you recognize manipulation or gave you courage to set boundaries, please like and subscribe. Your support means everything as we build a community where personal growth and healthy relationships are valued above toxic family obligations. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your worth isn't measured by what you can give others, but by the boundaries you set to protect your own well-being.